Today's conversation is with someone who not only walks closely with trauma survivors, those who've been through extreme grief or loss, or a situation where there's been a trauma event, but they are someone who has seen discipleship actually multiply among them. And today we want to explore this issue. How do we help people who are in severe trauma situations, be it sexual abuse, be it an earthquake or disaster or a war? How do we help people in these situations, and how do we walk with them towards not only becoming a disciple of Jesus, but receiving the healing of God in their lives, and then being able to reproduce that where they are then ministering to others? We're going to talk about what the Bible teaches us and what we can learn from experts like our guest today. What does it teach us about obedience, the restorative power of Christ, and how to go about this process of being used of God to bring that healing in people's lives that we're discipling? So I'm really excited to have our guest, Hallie, on the show, and I'll be right back with her in just a moment.
Are you ready to unlock your potential as a disciple maker? Then it is time to dive deeper into the principles that are changing lives with the Multipliers Mindset course. This transformative course accompanies the book, The Multipliers Mindset, Thinking Differently About Discipleship by Cynthia Anderson. These lessons will help you not just through reading about a multiplying movement, but how to actively live out a lifestyle that leads towards movements. And here's the best part. It comes with a practical workbook, which is designed to take your learning even further. This workbook guides you step by step to apply what you learn and to impact the lives of lost people around you. With easy-to-follow steps, uplifting lessons, and timeless truths from the book, this course equips you to make disciples and to start groups that multiply. Visit multipliersmindset.com to step further into the work God is calling you to do. Let's multiply together.
Well, I am so excited to have Hallie on the podcast today. And welcome, Hallie. Great to have you on Dare to Multiply.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And as I said before in the intro, Hallie is somebody who has a lot of professional experience and personal experience in discipling people who have been through trauma events in their lives, survivors. She's worked in lots of different aspects. But Hallie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how did you get involved in working with trauma victims or people who've experienced that kind of an event in their lives? How'd you get motivated for that or start down that road?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question, and I'm going to try to make it very focused. Briefly, my professional life in the USA was in mental health, specifically in the field of developmental disabilities. So I am very, very passionate about the brain and neuroscience. I love studying about neurology, and so when I moved overseas, I continued studying with more of a focus on trauma and becoming, I would say backing up just a bit, with becoming a mom 17 years ago. It focused that even more on women, so not just the spectrum of people that have developmental disabilities or mental health issues. It was focused on women's health specifically.
Interesting how God used motherhood to kind of put that desire in your heart and show you that need. As a mom and grandma myself, I can identify with that. Yeah, it gives you a compassion and an empathy towards women. And so, we'd love to hear more about that. And I know that you've worked in community development as well and disaster relief. So you've done a number of different things. And particularly on this podcast, we're interested to know about discipleship and disciple making, not just discipling someone to follow Jesus, but to follow Jesus and fish for men, become someone that God would use to help others as well. And I talk a lot about how God can use anyone,
Mm-hmm.
including the broken, including I have areas of brokenness still in my life and things that God's working on. And so we're excited to hear some of your stories and insights that you have about how to go about that. I know there's people listening who are really interested in helping but don't know how. So really excited to learn from you today in this. So yeah, let's just start with the first question, kind of from your experience. How does trauma most deeply affect someone's ability to trust God, to trust leaders? I know that's a foundational aspect. If we're going to disciple someone, we need trust, and we need them trusting God. So how did those things get affected?
Yeah, so just going back a little bit, just touching on brain science, when a person is stuck in that place of trauma, and actually we define trauma first of all as a series of events, or it could be an event that you have either experienced or personally witnessed, that has created significant long-term effect upon you. Could be emotionally, could be physically. And when we're stuck in that place, our limbic system, that logic part of our brain, and the sensing
Mm,
part, those two parts are disconnected. And it really prevents a lot of new information going in, and you can even forget what you already know because you can become stuck. The trust is diminished because your brain is just seeking safety. So if I
mm,
were to just come in and tell you, oh, don't worry, chill out, calm down, you're fine. If the brain doesn't feel that, then the words that I'm saying aren't really getting in there. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. I'm thinking through some situations in my life where all of a sudden I couldn't think straight, or I couldn't even hear what people were saying because I was scared, or I was, and that's not even to that degree. So multiply that 100 times and I can imagine. Yeah. Yeah. So your
Mhm.
brain kind of gets stuck. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful way God created our nervous system to operate. It is a protective mechanism, but we don't have to stay stuck in that spot and not be able to grow further. That's the good news.
Mm. That is the good news. So, for somebody who's trying to help someone get unstuck in that way and build trust, kind of what does that process look like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to refer to specifically to a tool that I use, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is called Healing Conversations. And this was written by psychologists, counselors, different people of faith backgrounds. And this material was created specifically to use in the immediate aftermath of a crisis, for practitioners working specifically maybe in a flood zone or post-war, or like the earthquake that was experienced, in the Balkans 3 years ago. And so this material really walks you through, just in a very simple way, in an understanding of the brain, of what does a healing journey look like. And so
Hmm.
it would take a lot of time for me to go step by step through that with you. That's why I would love, if you want more information, for you to take the training.
Yeah,
But we
we will
use
definitely talk about that.
stories. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
at
we
the
use
end.
stories, narrative, we teach lament, we teach deep breathing, learning how to quiet yourself. So there's a few different things that you would do, because we 100% believe that healing happens in community.
Hmm. Yeah. Talk a little bit more about that. Healing happens in community as we're looking at discipling people and creating discipleship communities, groups of disciples. How have you seen that healing and community work in a disciple making or say a DBS, Discovery Bible
Mhm.
Study kind of context?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I have seen some really beautiful unfoldings of this, specifically with a group of women who were able to be invited into a healing space, a safe place, specifically in maybe a woman's home that they already all knew each other. They all had experienced a similar loss or grief, whether it was a loved one or their home or all their finances or some injury. This was in a crisis zone, and just began talking. And so you were, drinking tea, telling the stories. Oh, tell me about this person and what have you experienced in loss. And so just fully letting each woman share whatever her heart wants to guide her into sharing. And we don't
Mm,
ask a lot of questions, tell me more, or, oh, you should do this or that, or there isn't even a lot of like dialogue. It's a lot of listening in that communal space, and then moving into some lament and maybe into just some sitting in silence and grieving and breath work, and then prayer. And you may have several of these healing conversations. This could happen once a week for weeks
mm,
before you are able to move into DBS, to move into, oh, let me share a story with you that this reminds me of. Um, yeah, because that can, we want to jump to scripture, and we want to jump to truth right away. But as I reminded you with the brain and where we are, it doesn't mean the Bible isn't alive and living, but there are steps that we follow specifically in this workshop that I teach that allows the person to shorten that gap between that sensing and that logic part of their brain to be able better to understand what you're saying.
mm. What I hear you saying, Hallie, is that when we're working with survivors, when we're working with people who've experienced some severe trauma, the first step is to listen, listen a lot, create safety and safe space for them to be quiet and to work on some of these other issues that are going on in the brain before we even necessarily start doing discovery Bible study or bringing scripture stories to them. That those first conversations, those first meetings with them as a group are really, really key in kind of building a foundation that you then can begin to build upon. Am I getting it right?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That's
yeah. Just
great.
letting people tell their story.
Right. Yeah, and I know you can't put a time frame on it, but is that something that would be a few months of meeting, or would it be a few weeks, or just to kind of give us a little bit of a framework, a
Yeah,
year, or is it
yeah.
every case is different?
um, we have seen that this beginning section, we like to call them the three villages in our workshop. And so this first place that you begin, I would say could be a couple of weeks or up to 3 months. Yeah.
Mm,
And the second place I would say is usually the longest. And so, sorry, I have my little villages here. So we have the village of um, anger and denial, and generally that's what happens immediately. And so
mm,
then we move into the next stage, which could be anywhere from 3 months up to a year, and that's the village of no hope, where you just kind of become numb and you feel like nothing is ever going to change. I'm just stuck here. And you travel back and forth. Sometimes we show people you go back and forth between anger and denial and no hope sometimes many times over a few months. But our goal is to be people who will walk with you all the way to the new beginning, the village of new beginning, and that's where
Mm,
you slowly start to realize that things have changed and shifted. But this whole process, this could be a year, 15 months to, just depends. Um, just from a purely like scientific point of view, they say that the sooner someone is met with community and safety and a healing environment, like the quickest after a crisis or a disaster has occurred, they do have a better chance of the long-term effects of it being mitigated.
mm, sure. Right. So I hear there's lots of different variables in the time frame, but that it takes patience and you don't jump to the gospel, or you don't jump to scripture too early, when you're in these working with these kinds of situations, but you want to really build that listening environment, safety space for people to feel heard and to begin to process the things that have happened to them. And that's such good input. Just this is just a side comment, and I didn't send you this question ahead, but what if you have someone who's in this situation, this kind of a situation, but who's in a group with others who are not? Um, what do you recommend for that kind of a situation? Because I think some of our listeners may be facing that, somebody in their discovery group or their discipleship group, they find out, oh, they've gone through an abusive situation, and they're trying to figure out how to disciple them in the context with the others. Would it be to move them into a separate group, or what's that look like?
Yeah. I believe that, everyone has their own narrative, their own stories, and the brain really can't differentiate. They say if you're wearing a backpack that's full of 50 rocks that all weigh a pound each, or one 50-pound boulder, your mind doesn't know any different. And so I think that even if a woman was like, oh, I just lost my entire family in an earthquake and my home, my building collapsed, and you're sitting beside a woman who is saying, like, oh, my husband just lost her job, these could feel very heavy to both women. It could feel very similar. And a lot of times we try to diminish something we're feeling because someone else's story sounds so much worse.
Mm,
But you're still creating this same healing environment. You're still listening to each other. You're walking through. I mean, if the woman who has, man or woman, has the worst story in the group and feels out of place or like nobody really understands me, maybe someone could recognize that and just do more one-on-one. And we do teach in this workshop how to assess if someone is actually ready for, if they need just the one-on-one. Are there constant tears? Do you see a lack of self-care, lack of motivation, a
mm.
lot of talk about dying? So you begin to understand how to assess where a person is in their journey.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds really helpful. Um, yeah, another question I wanted to ask Holly is just a lot of people, I think the common way of thinking is that when somebody has been through a traumatic event, um, particularly with, I would say, sexual abuse or those kinds of things, that they're going to need, years and years of counseling before God could ever make them ready to be used by Him. Um, I know we don't want to push the time frame, but what's been your experience with that? Does God use people in the midst of their crisis, or is it better to wait, when you recognize something like that before kind of encouraging them to share their faith with others or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say that, okay, that I feel like there's two answers to this because some women possibly, it's so fresh that they can only think about themselves and how they feel, and any little trigger is, creating like this second wound if they're placed in an environment that is not a healing environment, for example. But one of the things that we encourage from this workshop is share what you're learning from the very first session. Like,
Mm,
no matter what you are going through, where you are, I do not expect you to be at a specific place of health before you can share this with someone else that's right in front of you. And so, from our very first conversation, I'll even say, now go out and do an act of kindness. Buy a bottle of water for someone. If you can't buy a bottle of water for someone, sit with someone else and share this story, listen to their story. And so we give the tools that they can immediately go home and do with their children, their husbands, their best friend, their neighbor, because you want to feel empowered that, hey, I am not going to be stuck here forever and I have purpose. I need purpose.
mm, yeah. I think that has been so true for me, when I've worked with people who've experienced real loss, and even in my own life, that having that sense of purpose and feeling like I can do something good for others is part of my healing. I have a little story of a time when I lost a really close colleague, and God led me to take a child into our home who was severely malnourished at that time. And it was
Mm,
crazy in the natural, but God used that little baby so much to bring healing to me as I loved on her and gave out. And I had a purpose that was manageable. It wasn't, I didn't have to go preach on a stage or anything, but I can feed a baby who's starving.
mhm,
I can at
mhm.
least do that, as I was grieving and walking through loss. And yeah, so I think that's so key, is giving people in trauma purpose. And
Yeah.
I'm really glad you shared about that. That's really neat.
Yeah. Even
Yeah.
as you just told me that story, how did you feel just now?
Yeah, yeah, it's beautiful, just like, okay, I wanna keep doing that. I wanna keep
Yeah.
being used
Yeah.
of God in the midst of my brokenness, grief, suffering, whatever it is I'm going through. I know that's a key to my healing process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I could see that in your eyes as you're sharing that story. And so you're
Yeah.
refilling that good, and that's like, there's so many good tools that I don't focus on specifically in this workshop, but passing the peace, psychological first aid, there's a lot of those things with
Mm,
how narrative and sharing these positive stories, even when you feel so broken or you have nothing left to give to anyone else,
right,
can be
right.
so helpful and give you purpose.
Wow. Wow, that's great. Yeah, well, I think that's really key for many. Tell us, Hallie, some stories. I just shared a little bit of one of my stories, but and yeah, trauma on the mission field. The 35 plus years we've had many incidents that we've gone through and had to walk through. But I'd love to hear some of the stories of some of the people that you've worked with, how God's brought healing and even used them to bring healing to others.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking of one specific woman who, yeah, she experienced great loss a few years ago. She met a woman just through receiving soup in a soup kitchen, and this woman turned out to be a colleague of mine. And so my colleague began just sitting and drinking tea and listening, and then pretty soon the women grew and grew, and the stories became so heavy that my colleague reached out, and so then I began going and supporting her. And so the trust had begun to already be built. And so just fast forward, 3 years later, and this woman is following Jesus, is seeing through being listened to, being a friend, being able to walk through with the person that was my colleague, walking through like the rebuilding of her home and going and making multiple visits to spend time with this woman's children, to spend time with this woman's parents, and then bringing friends in like me who we also get to sit and listen to the story, and we read the Bible together. And now this woman has invited her neighbors and her friends and her sister-in-law, and it grew to where we started breaking off into, like, okay, this neighborhood group will meet and this neighborhood group will meet this day. And this is even in a different country than I'm working in, so I don't get to travel there often. So when I go and I get to see, like, wow, like these women have really just taken it. They're studying together. Their understanding of the scripture is blowing me away when I listen to them amongst themselves read. And, well, what do you think this means? What does this say about God? And, of course, there are still women who are joining the group and are not at that village yet. They're still back here in anger and denial. It's okay. Like, it still works. We still, do the stories, do the listening, lament together, breathe together. Um, I do a little bit of like massage therapy. I bring my essential oils. And so these women just feel loved, and they just feel safe, and they just,
Mm,
feel that love of Jesus, like coming out through this safe space of women. And this woman has emerged as a leader now in this group. And
mm.
she gets to open her home and host us and when we're there and feed us, and it's like her honor and privilege to be doing this in her neighborhood.
Wow. Wow, that's so cool. And, as I've worked with movement leaders around the world, it's it's incredible how many of them have come out of deeply traumatic experiences in their life. And I feel like when God brings transformation and healing, it's like I have to share this story with other people. There's kind of no holding them back as God brings healing. It's kind of like yeah, the woman who washed Jesus' feet, with her tears, and like I am so in love with him. He has changed me so dramatically. I want to share with others, and many of them even become movement leaders, as I've seen. But,
Yeah.
that early foundation of safety and listening and putting in the time, um, to invest in them is so, so key.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another question I just wanted to throw in there, kind of insert is, okay, it does take a lot of time of listening, a lot of patience. You know, my husband and I've worked with some people that, man, it seems like every time I turn around, we're needing to have another conversation. And so, how, as a worker, how do you put boundaries? On that, and kind of protect yourself. I know as a professional, you've done that. There have been times where I've been like, okay, we need to limit this conversation to an hour and a half, 2 hours. We can't go on for 4 hours listening, for our own like exhaustion or things like that. Just speak to that really briefly. How do we kind of protect ourselves for the long haul so that we can keep giving to people who have been through serious trauma?
Yeah, that is so important, and I love how this multiplying hope material, it is not only for the people we are offering healing and hope to, but it's for us too, because I recognize, like, wow, I have just listened to three different horrible stories today, and I'm exhausted and I feel like I just want to take a nap, but maybe I need to journal out a lament or take a walk and just tell Jesus every emotion that I'm feeling right now. Maybe I need to just stop and use the quieting exercises myself, just ask myself, how do I feel? And so do some deep breathing, get some time alone. Jesus modeled this for us, getting the time
Mm-hmm.
alone, like prayer, lament, not expressing disappointment in the people that are, not doing what we tell them to do, or not always following our advice. and like still being able to show up and be authentic and to love and to care and not fake it. You know, we have to take care of ourselves,
Mm,
otherwise we can begin to experience that secondary trauma. So we really encourage people to practice what they preach and
mm,
do the same self-care, taking
yeah.
care. And we do say after we put a time limit on listening. We try to always end that with, you know, it sounds like you would like to share more, but I'm out of time today. Can I come back and can we talk about this again? Could we meet again for coffee? And then set a time and then just say, can I pray for you? And then it's just a very gentle, loving way to end and be able to move on.
Right. Yeah. So good. So we need to learn how to stop it with hope of more conversation and an offer, but also not just letting it go on and on forever. Yeah, where it can start to drain you more than it's helping that person, probably. That's what I hear you saying. So yeah, so good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, our conversation is going so fast, Holly. I feel like there's so much more that I want to ask you, but tell us a little bit more about these tools. You've talked about the villages quite a bit already, but how would people get a hold of that? Yeah,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, we have we actually have different modules to use. Like, for example, we have one right now that until the recent events happened, I would have had the privilege of getting to go and work with people in the Middle East area, but now airspaces are closed and stuff like that. But if we're talking about something very specific that you're dealing with, of you're like, man, I really need some help with someone immediately in a crisis. So we have help for you there, and we have seen that some of the things we've tried needed to be adapted because in the attention span of some of these affected individuals was so short that you weren't
Mm,
going to get an hour with them. And so we've
mm,
adapted. So we have material for that. We have the initial healing conversations. And then we also have maybe for someone whose trauma is a little bit further in the past and they are ready for more, we have a program called New Hope, and that walks them through like an 8 week DBS style. You're still doing three villages, listening, all of those things, staying out of judgment, staying out of advice giving, and just letting the Bible stories do the work. Um, and your presence, of course. And so all of these materials are available after you've done a training. And so it's not just
okay.
something you can go to the website and print out yourself. You do need to um, either contact them through the website, or I'm sure you'll have more resources to share at the end, as a way that if you wanted training by me via Zoom, I do some in person if I can access you. But yeah,
Yeah. Wow, that sounds amazing. So I think we'll go ahead and put up that link. That's multiplyinghope.org is where
yes.
they can kind of people who are interested in this can get a sort of an initial picture. But then if you want to talk with Hallie and you say, I need to find out more about this online training, I need to go through this training, these materials sound like exactly what I need, contact us through Dare to Multiply. You can put a comment in the chat or write to us hello at daretomultiply.com. Sorry, yeah, .com. And then we'll be able to connect you to Hallie for those. So I wanted to make sure those resources are available. Yeah. Well, speaking directly, Hallie, to missionaries, to pastors, maybe in the US or in Europe or Australia who are listening, or to a disciple making movement practitioner on the field somewhere who's really wanting to begin this kind of a ministry. Yeah, what would you most caution them about? And what would you want to encourage them in?
Hmm. I would caution them with, I think the caution would be just not listening fully enough to hear the person's story. I mean, because many times we as followers of Jesus, we do want to jump to the gospel. We want to jump right into the
Mm,
hope, sharing the hope that we have and what has Jesus done. But I think I would just caution specifically if you're working with this, survivors, abuse, trauma, these underserved parts of the population maybe that you're focusing on, I would just caution of just the impatience that can sometimes also come from, well, I've already, listened to this person and they've told me the same story 20 times. They're just stuck and you kind of want to wash your hands of it and move on. Um, just educate yourself maybe a little bit more on just a tiny bit of brain science, and but just listen. I would say that, moving right into the encouragement, just listen, take this workshop, listen even more, learn the questions. We teach you 3 simple questions to ask in this workshop, and just be ready to be there for the long haul,
mm,
and be a safe person.
yeah. Wow. I
Yeah,
think that's great advice for working with anyone, isn't it? I
yeah.
mean, we're particularly talking about those who've been through trauma, but everybody needs safe people. They need people that they can trust over the long haul to be there for them. And yeah, I often say, discipleship is not something you do in a meeting or a classroom. It's life on life. It's a commitment long term to walk with people towards
Yeah, and there
a
aren't
place of. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and there are no quick fixes. This isn't a Band-Aid. If I could just say to you something, Cynthia, and you're in the middle of a crisis, if I could just speak some special words to you of advice and fix you, we'd all be fixed, right? So
Yeah.
it's more than that, and God has given us every tool. And this particular one, I'm not saying is any better than many of the other ones out there. It's just the one that has felt very useful, very simple, and reproducible. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the combination of bringing the wisdom of, your counseling and professional experience together with disciple multiplication principles and kind of melding these together in a way, an approach that works not only to bring that healing and hope to people, but then to lead them into a place where they're starting to multiply and share with others. It's so good. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
well, thank you so very much. Our time is up. It's gone really fast, but yeah, I really, really appreciate you being on the podcast today. And I'll be right back with a recap of what we've talked about and some action steps.
Thank you so much.
If you've been encouraged by this podcast and you're longing to grow as a disciple who multiplies, I'd love to invite you to go a little deeper. The Dare to Multiply membership, including our Exploring Further and Diving Deeper options, is a place for ongoing encouragement, practical teaching, and real stories from people living this out right where they are. Members receive exclusive content, access to interviews, and discussions you won't hear on the podcast, and a community focused on putting disciple making into practice. Your membership doesn't just help you grow, it also helps support this podcast and the work of equipping disciple makers around the world. You can learn more at multipliersmindset.com DTM membership. The link is in the show notes, so thank you for considering supporting our podcast in this way. All right. That was such a wonderful time with Hallie. I learned a lot that's going to help me as I'm discipling people who are experiencing trauma or have recently experienced trauma or even many years ago as we disciple them. And I want to give you some takeaways. One of the things she said is that when people have experienced trauma, new information is prevented from entering the brain because the brain is seeking safety. And so people who have experienced trauma can't hear you well. And I think that's so important for us to realize when we feel like we're talking and people aren't able to absorb it. That's a key that maybe we need to listen, stop, and listen again rather than trying to communicate with them. And maybe there's a trauma event or something that's preventing their brain. It's not their fault, but it's preventing their brain from healing. She talked about as well how some of the elements of these healing conversations are listening, stories, lament, breathing, and all of these happen before we can introduce scripture or share the gospel. That having people in communities walking through these early stages of these healing conversations is really, really key. She talked about how if you rush the process, they can't really hear what you're saying as you begin to talk about scripture. So it's not going to be effective. It's not going to be fruitful. We need to be patient, be willing to move slowly with people and walk alongside them. And she talked about how we need to be careful as disciple makers and pastors and leaders and practitioners. We need to be careful about not listening to their story and jumping straight to presenting the gospel in a gospel conversation. That first we ask, to hear their story and come alongside them as a friend. And then we need to be ready to be there with them for the long haul. And that's not easy. There is sacrifice involved, but Holly talked about some of the ways that we can protect ourselves, have boundaries in place, and take care of ourselves in a sense as we are relating to people who are going through trauma experiences. She talked about some of these different villages, which I thought was really helpful. The village of anger and denial, and then moving into a period of no hope before they can move into a new beginning. And I love that imagery of being willing to move from village to village. These groups can multiply and they can lead to movements. But it's just amazing to see how God uses people who have been healed, who've been transformed by the power of Jesus to start movements, to minister to others. But first, we need to be willing to do that foundational work in their lives. God bless you guys. I want to encourage you again. Write to us if you're interested to find out about Hallie's resources and materials, or go to multiplyinghope.org. It's in the show notes. The links are there. But I encourage you, if this is something God is calling you to and drawing you to, these are really excellent resources that we highly recommend. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful week. And let's keep loving people. Let's keep being those safe people who are willing to go the long haul. And here's my action step for you. Who is it that you need to slow down with and do more listening with? Take time to listen a little bit longer than feels comfortable, a little bit more than when you want to speak. Take time this week to be a listener, to hear people's stories, even before you jump into sharing the gospel with them. God bless. See you next week. That's all we've got for this episode of Dare to Multiply. One thing that would really help both us and other people who might like to listen in is for you to rate and review the podcast, if you haven't done that yet, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I'd also love to connect with you on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Feel free to message me with any topics, questions you'd like addressed, or guests you'd like me to interview. Until next week then, please remember, no matter how ordinary you feel, God's dreams for us are always bigger than we can imagine. Let's dare to trust Him for a greater harvest.